is it growing? Are you seeing sort of more people coming in?
Yeah, and we do see more people coming in. Really, I think the big upsurge in growth was kind of the beginning of the Trump administration. But since then, that growth has been really steady, and we see more young people coming in. We see more diversity of people coming in. I'd say in the past year, probably the largest growth has been in the Asian community that we've seen come in, but we have all kinds of members. We have a huge, huge variety of people all over the country who have come in. And one of the things we talk about is that, we want to be welcoming for everybody. Like, you don't actually have to be a liberal to be a member. You just have to understand that that's who the club was created for and by and is run by. And we want people who come in who want to have fun and who want to interact with us in a way that's going to be polite and fun. But we're not the gun club where you're going to come in and start talking about these other issues that may be kind of the more conservative Republican darling issues and have that met comfortably, because this is really a group of leftists. But I will say, I mean, for example, Beto O'Rourke gets zero love from our organization. Gavin Newsom, I mean, none.
Yeah, actually, there's another thing I noticed spending time with liberal gun club members was that, certainly there can be discomfort with that sort of stereotypical, conservative Republican gun owner or whatever, but usually there's actually more conflict with, fellow liberals who don't believe in gun rights. It seems like I remember one member telling me that they'd be more afraid to tell their liberal friends that they're gun owners than their gun owning friends that they're liberal. Do you think that follows?
I think it depends on who you are and where you are. I mean, I think for example, for some of our disabled members, or especially some of our members of color, I think, they don't tell people they're gun owners ever. Because they don't think it's safe. But yeah, I mean, I think for a big majority of our members, they also don't talk to their liberal friends about, I'm a gun owner. I'm kind of the exception to that, and a lot of the leadership, obviously.
Sure.
I mean, it's pretty out there that we own firearms and we offer to take people to the range. But we do talk about that. And that's one of the things the club talks about with the membership is, that's fine. Like, lots of people who are gun owners don't talk about it, and that's fine. Like that, that's not an abnormal thing. But, I love David Yamane's thing about guns are normal. I mean, they really are normal. People, more than a third of Americans own them. It's normal.
Yeah.
But it's normal for liberals too, right? I mean, something like even before this surge that we know has happened since 2020, I think it was right around somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of all, of all liberals said, I live in a house with a gun, or we own one. I mean, it's normal for everybody. But it is true. Like our membership definitely calls the Democratic Party out on it. And the way you see that the most, right, is in primary voting for us.
Interesting.
For sure.
Yeah. And I guess going off of that, by the way, we had Professor Yamane on the podcast a few months back. Yeah. People want to check out more of his thoughts, because I think you're right. One thing that gets really undervalued in our discussion about guns is just how many people own them, and how those people cut across all sorts of different ideological or race or gender lines. And they own them for all kinds of different reasons. There's a lot of reasons you might want to own a gun. 2020 is sort of a good example of this. There was obviously a surge of gun buying after the pandemic, but interestingly, there was a big surge surrounding, the rioting but before that, the actual murder of George Floyd that later, inspired this protests and then rioting. So there are people buying guns because of what happened with George Floyd, seeing a police officer, murder a black man that way, made, I'm sure, plenty of black people want to buy guns. And then, the rioting inspired people to buy guns, including, I'm sure, Black people in those neighborhoods that were affected by that, but also people
Sure.
all over the country. So, even the same event on either side of it can push people to go and purchase firearms. And so, it's something that doesn't get discussed as much until we talk about a group like yours, of this
Right.
sort of stereotype breaking group where it's, the simplistic thing is to say that all liberals hate guns or all conservatives love guns, which is also not true, of course. But, it's more important to understand the reality of America, people in America. Gun ownership is much broader than I think we ever really talk about.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, I mean, you're even seeing in Florida, is it the Secretary of Agriculture who's the statewide elected Democrat who filed
Nikki Fried.
the suit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see that and you're realizing like maybe there's little things. I mean, there's a Democrat running for sheriff in San Diego County who's pro concealed carry permits. And so in California, the sheriffs in general are the ones who issue concealed carry permits,
right.
And so they have a lot of power on whether you get it, and it's county by county. He's a Democrat. He's absolutely liberal. I know him, and he's absolutely pro. He's like no. And as a matter of fact, he ran in the last election, and it forced the conservative sheriff to start issuing them.
Mm-hmm.
He moved because a Democrat said, "No, I'm going to issue these. You're wrong."
And I guess going off of that, there's two interesting points here. One is the first one I want to talk about is just this influx of new gun owners over the last 2 years, right? That was just alluding to earlier. A lot of these people tend to be from demographics that traditionally are more liberal. They vote more Democratic. You have a lot more minorities, a lot more women buying guns now. And that has only accelerated over those last 2 years. And, it's one, have you seen, it sounds like you've seen some of that effect in your own group, as you were
Mm-hmm.
discussing earlier, more Asian Americans joining. But to me, that signals, one of the big long-term trend stories, because how those people end up voting on guns down the line is going to determine a lot about how gun politics play out over the next several decades, I think. I think the initial reaction from a lot of gun owners or gun rights activists, especially on the Republican side of things, was that these people who bought guns for the first time in 2020 were going to immediately become single issue gun voters, and they were going to go out and vote party line Republican, and Donald Trump was guaranteed to be reelected. Obviously that didn't happen. And I've always thought that the more realistic view of what will happen with these folks is that they're not necessarily going to change their entire political identity just because they became gun owners. They're not necessarily going to change their position on abortion or, Medicare or universal health care, whatever else, just because they bought a gun, but they might change their views on guns, right? Would follow, certainly. And we have seen surveys that show that effect already. The University of Chicago put out a survey that showed people who bought guns over the last 2 years, in some cases, were actually more in favor of loosening some restrictions than previous owners, especially around things like waiting lists, probably because they had to interact with waiting lists at a moment where they were very eager to buy a gun for their own protection. And so it seems that it might have an even bigger effect just on the Democratic Party in particular, in becoming more amenable towards gun rights and running more candidates or at least candidates who run with a more amenable attitude towards guns may do better in the future. You think that's sort of in line with what you're just talking about there?
Yeah. So if you look at John Ossoff's campaign in Georgia, the senator, there was nothing about guns on his page ever. Now, how does he vote on it? once you get into Congress, does your vote change because there's party politics going on? Sure, maybe. But he knew that he would never win if in Georgia, of all states, if he put up an anti-gun. He knew he couldn't be Beto, right? I mean, so first of all, Beto lost Texas because he was anti-gun. I mean, that's why he lost Texas. If he had been pro-gun, he would have been able to pull in more people. And so what happens is if you have that stance, right, it's not that you're going to go vote. It's not that those voters are going to suddenly vote for the Republican. It's that they're going to stay home. So that what happens is it suppresses the vote on one side and it doesn't raise it on the other, but suppresses it on one side. So that's a different thing than gaining voters for the other side.
So you think we're already seeing this effect in
I do.
situations like Nikki Fried in Florida or John Ossoff in Georgia and I mean, Beto's campaign?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, Beto's backed off some of the anti-gun stuff this year compared to what his campaign was the last time. I mean, you're starting to see even though to gun people, it's not enough of a change. And I get that. Like, I don't like I'm pro-gun, but I want to do XYZ thing. And mostly it's, I want to ban ARs, but I'm totally fine if you own handguns. Well, why? Let's talk about the numbers. That makes no sense, right? And so I understand like gun people saying it's not just enough to not talk about it. I get it, but you're still starting to see that change in the Democratic Party in small ways. Now there's so much money involved, right? There's so much money on both sides, right? Involved in what's the position going to be, that you're not going to see that change immediately, but you are seeing it in the voting. You are seeing it in who's coming out. You're seeing it in things like even in Oakland, there's somebody running for city council in Oakland who is Democratic and pro-gun in Oakland, California, of all places. I mean, this is a city that's like, the police department is under a federal like order to be managed. It's like that is the last city in the world that you think you'd see that. And you've got somebody running. You're starting to see it. You're seeing it in people who are running for lower down positions, right? You're seeing a lot more people saying, hey, I want to talk about this. You're seeing it in more organizations that are set up to reach a broader group of people, not just ours, but things like NAAGA, things like Walk the Talk America, right? That's a non-political gun organization that their whole focus is talking to doctors. Again, that's not necessarily a really liberal group of people that they're reaching out to, but it's definitely a group that had been anti-gun for a very long time. And they're going out there and talking to them. So you're starting to see it in small ways. So are we going to see it this cycle, right? Like this year? Probably not in as much of an obvious way, but I think we'll see it for really 4 years from now is probably the first cycle we'll really see a difference.